Did we look at QE? Did we look at getting audio in from that into this, or just leave it?
So are you streaming?
I think so. I'm trying to check it.
And are you using the cellular or using?
He seems like a nice guy. So I think, okay, rock over 11 and see what we can do for you. So he might rock up. Yeah, no, that's all right. I just want to do a bit of a couple of years. Such a nice guy. Sleeping on the porch.
Good morning, friends. Good morning. What, don't you like each other?
That's right.
Now, you've all been behaving terribly, so I've had to split you all up. I can say I've never gathered at a church service like this. It feels like a UN council meeting or something, with us all having our individual spaces. We've got some cameras operative, hoping that we are streaming this live across Facebook and some other platforms, and that people can watch later in the comfort of their own home. So for those in your dressing gowns and your own boots, we're jealous. But here we are. We have adopted the umbrella theme this year of wilderness for our journey of Lent. Who could have possibly predicted when we did that we'd have a title and a topic and a theme so apt for the scenario we find ourselves in? We are indeed in the wilderness. Just like any period of wilderness, we don't predict its arrival. We have no idea how long we will be wandering and searching. We don't know the way out. All we know is that we're in this together, and the wilderness will end. I would like to read to you a poem called Lockdown, written by Friar Richard Hendrick, who says this: yes, there is fear. Yes, there is isolation. Lockdown. Yes, there is panic buying. Yes, there is sickness. Yes, there is even death. But they say that in Wuhan, after so many years of noise, you can hear the birds again. They say that after just a few weeks of quiet, the sky is no longer thick with fumes, but blue and grey and clear. They say that in the streets of Assisi, people are singing to each other across the empty squares, keeping their windows open so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family around them. They say that a hotel in the west of Ireland is offering free meals and delivery to the housebound. Today, a young woman I know is busy spreading flyers with her number through the neighbourhood so that the elders may have someone to call on. Today, churches, synagogues, mosques and temples are preparing to welcome and shelter the homeless, the sick, the weary. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbours in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big we really are, to how little control we have, to what really matters, to love. So we pray and remember that yes, there is fear, but there does not have to be hate. Yes, there is isolation, but there does not have to be loneliness. Yes, there is panic buying, but there does not have to be meanness. Yes, there is sickness, but there does not have to be disease of the soul. Yes, there is even death, but there can always be a rebirth of love. Wake to the choices you make as to how to live now. Today, breathe. Listen behind the factory noises of your panic. The birds are singing again. The sky is clearing. Spring is coming. And we are always encompassed by love. Open the windows of your soul, and though you may not be able to touch across the empty square, sing. Sing. I want to urge you over the coming weeks and months, as we enter a time of wilderness, that we need tools to negotiate and navigate. We need each other. We need to find new ways of being, and we need to be resourced and nourished. I want to urge you over the coming weeks and coming months. I find it interesting as we all go in, we all fear the particles that are in our air. We fear where we should cough and sneeze and handshake and hold. The idea of breathing is actually compromised, and yet what we need to do more than ever is breathe deeply. I want to ask you a question. How much of the news have you been paying attention to? How many times have you checked a headline? How many times have you read information about the coronavirus? And then, contrary to that, how many walks in the forest have you done? How many times have you prayed or meditated or taken a moment of pause? More than ever before, the way we breathe is vital, is key. I want to urge you over these coming months, however they look, to resource yourself beyond yourself in something greater, in spirit. I want to encourage you to anchor your trust and your faith in something larger than the current circumstance, to breathe deeply whenever you can, to foster connection, and to face into the current reality as it is, fully and courageously. I'm going to offer you a meditation now. The meditation, it's called the Yahweh Prayer. The ancient Israelites spoke of God as spirit and as breath. Some rabbis believe that the word Yahweh was not just a cool, funky word, but was actually the word adopted because it best described the sound of inhaling and exhaling. So I want to offer you a resource, something to take with you, to offer you for these coming months, and also to do now in our gathering here and at home. I would encourage you to join me in noticing and anchoring yourself in this physical space, to become aware of your body in the seat or the bed you are in. Notice the contact your body makes with the chair that you're on. The contact your feet make with the floor. And I want to encourage you to take 3 large, deep breaths. And on that in-breath, take a huge yah. And with each exhaling, way. Ancient Israelites recognised that in speaking the name of God, they were constantly reminded that God was the presence that sustained them and held together all things, from which they gained life and from which they returned. Continue to breathe in the life and love of Spirit. I breathe in Yah. I breathe out Way. This name of God, this breath of life, this miracle of love and peace and presence. I breathe it in. I breathe it out. Every moment of every day, I breathe in God. I breathe in peace. I breathe in light. I breathe in love. Yah. Way. Yah. Way. Yah. Way. Amen. 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 Let's stand and sing together. Christ as we serve you in different ways. How prophetic that is. On Tuesday evening, the church council met, and the motion was put, rather predictably, that the church building be closed to communal gatherings from the end of this week. We discussed this motion for an hour and a half. I pride myself on closing meetings at 9:30. We started that particular discussion after doing some other business at 9 o'clock, and we were still there after 10:30. As we sought to reconcile the view that firstly, meeting as a community may present an unacceptable risk to the most vulnerable in our community, but contrasted by the idea that being present as church is perhaps more important now than it has been for generations. For those who are unaware, Uniting Church operates by what we call consensus. In other words, coming to a point where everybody affirms decisions that are being made. We were unable in that 1.5 hours to achieve consensus. Instead, we chose to bring this question to the broader church community to inform a decision about gathering. That was originally the conversation that we were going to have today. It has, of course, become even more apparent over the past few days that closing our communal gathering is most likely now to be a necessity informed by higher powers rather than a decision that we make. And so I guess the conversation that I would like to invite you into is certainly any comments that you would like to make about gathering, but perhaps more importantly, how we continue to be church without being able to be present physically. And I'm not quite sure how to invite or begin that conversation, except perhaps to open it up to you people and the feedback that you would like to give us. Now, when I say us, there is a likelihood we had planned, and I think it's highly likely to go ahead, that the council would meet again this Wednesday in a special meeting, partly to take on board this conversation that we're about to have, and partly to make some decisions about what we do moving forward and how we continue to be a church. Jeff.
Great work on the remote church by the people, and I guess it's an easy question to consider. Should it be streamed so that we gather at the same time, or make it a podcast? And let's just flow from there. So
Certainly one of the questions that we need to consider. Yeah, whether there's just a few people that gather on a Sunday and we sort of do it live to people's living rooms, or whether it's done during the week individually and we all make a contribution is certainly one of the open questions. And it's good to know that Matt has lots of experience with podcasting. But what we're not wanting to do is to put the entire load onto Matt to just produce something on his own.
They can run football matches without audiences.
Very true, very true. And it's not the same, that's right. And it's not going to be.
We don't have the resources of Channel 7.
Carpet.
The church has got to be showing that they're law-abiding citizens, but we also want to be there for the community.
And what we are doing presently is actually within the guidelines of what's been up at the moment. Absolutely. Andrea.
Yeah, great. To follow the government guidelines, that's what the United Church is saying, that's what everyone's saying. But I'd like to think we're creative and flexible to come up with new ideas, and that's what the best things I've seen have been where people have done that and just lived from, like even day to day, but week to week about following the rules, but creatively. Even to have this space open during the week where people can come and sit and even play the service. Where people, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 people could be during the week. That's a real sign of keeping our doors open.
I'm going to repeat people's comments because of the stream, if that's okay. I'm not sure if it'll be picked up by the stream.
Ask the Facebook people.
Certainly feel free, if you are watching on Facebook, to indicate whether you can hear people's comments. But Andrea was talking about the opportunity to be creative, and some of that creativity might mean keeping the building open. It might mean things like actually playing in here recordings of the service for people to come and visit and spend time with as they choose to. Is an idea. Are there any comments or thoughts that people would like to make about the motion that was put, the idea of actually closing this building? Remember, the church is not the building, the church is the people that exist within it, but closing the building to all communal gathering. And that, of course, includes our hall hirers and other groups. Any feedback or responses that you would like to inform council?
I think it's responsible.
So we'll start with Gail. Yeah.
I think it's responsible.
It's a responsible decision, Gail says.
It's going to impact us financially.
Yes, it will. And we will talk about that a little bit later too, about moving towards direct giving so we can sustain the ministry of this place, and certainly Matt's ministry. That's not under any threat, by the way, but it's important that we find new ways of supporting that work. So we'll talk about that later.
I think we need to be aware that most of the organisations, I think all but one, have been directed by higher powers to close and not meet.
And certainly the
So
Baptist
there's
Church is no
only-
longer meeting. I know that for
There's
sure.
only one group meeting here in this complex at the moment.
Yeah, and but even with churches too, we haven't received a directive from Synod to close to meeting, but it's likely to come, and it'll certainly come in other church communities, absolutely, and other parts of the United Church. Some presbyteries will close.
Hashtag science. We could mandate that any users of the hall conduct screening. I keep coming back to the fact that every case starts with an elevated temperature, and we can mandate that people can only use the hall if they screen with a thermometer.
And that may be a way of the future in terms of what happens after we spend the time closing. Certainly the upcoming school holidays provide an opportunity for everyone to step back and take a break. And I think that includes our hall hirers, it certainly includes schools. And then it's what happens after that becomes the next question, and types of screening, those sorts of things may become something we consider. Yes.
I'm just interested, we live in the most beautiful place. Why can we meet outdoors? And I sort of mentioned that to Matt the other day. People have been having services and worshipping under trees for many centuries. And we've got good oaks up there, we could possibly gather around the oaks and do something a bit different. But I just wondered if it's possible for people, and is that, it's obviously different to meeting in an enclosed environment.
And it's certainly one of the questions that we did talk about, foreshadowing this type of conversation, was new ways of connecting, which within regulations may include meeting in smaller groups or meeting under the trees. There's certainly things that we need to consider and be mindful of and hear suggestions about. Can I perhaps invite Matt into the conversation as Ross shares a thought?
I think we really will end up facing lockdown because that seems to be the move throughout the world.
Yeah.
The other thing is, we as a church tend to be very building focused, and I think this is an opportunity for us perhaps to break away from that mindset. That's something I've always thought. A big problem with the United Church, well, all churches actually, we are focused on that building and what goes on in the building, and perhaps we need to step aside and think what really our faith is about.
And this really may well be one of the opportunities, is the opportunity to reorient. Yes. Can I invite you perhaps to take over the conversation?
You may. I may neglect your invitation, but you're welcome to invite me. To extend that conversation, and that's a really good springboard, I'd just like to further it with two questions, and that is, what are the biggest challenges that Corona presents for us as a community, as church, as people? And then, what are actually the gifts that this extends this offer? And that is the wilderness question, the challenges, but they are always surprising gifts. So, to begin with, what is people's sense of the greatest challenges of what we're facing? I'm going to hold the mic, but I won't get you to take the mic, just so there's not a passing around.
As part of the church council meeting on Tuesday, an hour and a half, I knew it was coming, but when the actual words came out, my heart went, and it stopped, sort of. My heart says, this is really sad, and this is just from my point of view, because this place is my family. I don't have a lot of friends, and I don't have a lot of contact with other people, so this is really scary for me. But my brain says it's the right thing to do, but I feel that I'm probably not the only one who thinks that. So, you know, we need to be careful of people, especially if the isolations get worse, that we need to be really contacting and talking and FaceTiming and everything else in between, because mental health will be a really, really big issue.
Significant challenge. Removing safety nets, gatherings, connection points for people. Other challenges.
Purpose. And I wonder, that's where I know I'm harping on about outdoors, but people can go for a walk together. You know, that is possible, and you don't need to do any touching or anything like that, as long as people are well. I think it sounds like we need to go and be in nature, because I think this is calling us to get back into our natural being and, you know, be in with the divine, which is our nature. And so I think, yes, I think there's creative alternatives are really important here.
Which is some of that gifting.
Yeah.
Forced to recreate, to think differently. Challenges though, other challenges for people?
Well, I was saying isolation and depression at first, but I'm also aware at the moment our internet's been down for 3 or 4 days, and that's scary too, if we want to be communicating.
That's the beauties of the challenge. We will rely on it a lot.
And it's a shock when you don't have it.
And it's a shock.
We haven't had internet now for 3 weeks, and it looks like it's still happening till early April. It's quite a shock to find that you don't have the internet. You don't realise how dependent you were, and so you've got to find other ways. And that's difficult.
Like all disruption, it's jarring. Even if it could ultimately be gifting, there's a jarring at the start. Any other challenges people are particularly concerned about?
I think that, you know, because we're all listening, we're plugged into the news and that we're in a kind of an era of, you know, challenge. So that feels like that the main thing at the moment, and it's harder for people to slip into that, oh, hang on, where are the gifts? Or, you know, and I think that that connection, however that happens, whether it's in the physical or in the on the ether, which obviously has its challenge, I think that's really important. What are you doing? What good could you do? What else could you do?
So the challenge of actually being consumed by this thing to a point where it actually robs our capacity to care, connect,
and even think creatively
and navigate well.
I think it's wise to limit all that input.
Yes.
Because I think it's overwhelming. We can't do anything about anything. We're doing what we can. And I think that takes away our strength. It takes away feeling that we can do this.
Yes.
It's saying to you, no, you can't do this. You know, you're in big trouble here. You better crawl into a bolt hole
Yes.
and hope that, you know, you're not going to die. And I think the other challenge, and for the older ladies in the group, is our grandchildren and our families. And, you know, if you're sort of in the group that you're a bit vulnerable and you know, I don't know what you do about that. I mean, you obviously love them very much, but you also know that you are putting yourself at risk.
Yes.
So it's a very difficult decision, that one for me.
Yes.
I think that's going to be hard.
Hashtag karaoke. There's something
Got a
good.
lot of hashtags going on.
Yeah, we
Putting
can.
our media
I'm putting the hashtags out. Singing is uplifting. For those at home, I'm sure they feel that they're missing out in that making the joyful noise is a lot of what this is about. In that we have a voice. So
We all have a voice.
Yeah, if you're on if you're just on the end of a screen,
Yes.
it doesn't work.
No, exactly. The incomplete thing that we'd be offering by doing the remote technology graphic.
Makes me wonder whether we could do singing off the balcony.
Yes!
You know,
Bring
just-
on the singing off the balcony.
And just allow people to come and be
Yeah,
there,
hang out in
have
the
the
garden.
distance, but hang out in the garden and
Good idea.
you'd be great at that part.
Barb's been doing it. Barb's been doing it from Carlisle Court.
Yeah,
That'd be
no,
on
but
it.
just a central place where people can
Yeah,
just come and
yeah.
hang out.
Yeah.
And sit in the garden and do animal.
Yeah.
You could bring your chair, you could bring your folding chair.
Yeah.
Gardens,
I
yeah.
feel like if someone said before for outdoors, maybe
Yeah.
it feels.
Even the cop shop leaning over the top of Belgrave Street.
Oh, yeah,
Pump
that's
them
right.
out.
The Belgrave Park.
Yeah, Belgrave Park.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yes.
Is this almost a transition into that question of, well, what are the gifts? Some creative ways of gathering, of returning to roots, being in nature, some embracing different ways of being for a season. Other sense for people of the gifts of this time?
I just want to say, like, I'm often reminded through this time of the hero's journey, you know, you're cruising along, everything's like whatever normal is, and then, you know, the descent. And it's at the bottom of that descent where we find the gifts.
That's
so
right.
it's like when we're going, holy heck, you know, this is real, this is dangerous, this is scary, you know, mass job loss, all the bad things. However, if we can access the gifts because they're there, we can access them and bring them back up.
Totally.
Yeah, and in that, you know, sharing with others who maybe can't get to that point, who are still on the descent, or who are stuck at the bottom without being able to see the gifts, the gold. Yeah. So yeah, bring them back out and into the community, sharing them out. Yeah.
Fascinating. There's a lot in that. Helping people navigate the descent, which no one wants to do. No one chooses descent.
No.
Yet at the bottom is some gifts, and uncovering that, discovering that, and integrating that. That's it. Also, other sense. So they're the gift or challenge, but potentially some gifts of this time.
Yeah, usually like over Easter time I go to Confest with a bunch of other Christians and we spend time trying to give a space for people who don't really usually connect with God but in a non-traditional way, and we just have a little marquee and kind of get together and, you know, form a circle and invite devotions. And yeah, I think it's not too far from what our church does and how we include meditation in our church. And yes, I can kind of see us sort of move into that sort of space, like holding elements of creativity and offering our way of being church, like just in a different space, but also allowing for potentially other people who don't normally come to church to be a part of the space. Yeah.
For those of us who feel like life just rushes on and on and on and on, there's a couple of things. I guess you've got time to think about actually what are the things that really matter that you really want to prioritise, and there's a little bit of that. And the other, to stop taking for granted some of the routines in the rush of this. So actually, I miss just turning up and seeing those people. And so a little bit of revaluing and remembering what happens.
Beautifully said. It is surely one of the great bizarre silver linings of this whole time. Forced going in, forced reflection, forced remembering, Beautiful. So revaluing, yeah.
I was just going to say that I think that all of us, in a sense, have a path that we walk continually. But the real nuggets are often found at that point where you stop one day and you go, I wonder where that path leads. And suddenly you find a magical view or some viewpoint you'd never actually even thought was there. And I think a lot of that may well be happening during this process.
Yes. Definitely. Hidden gifts we would not discover any other way but being led down a path we would never choose to take. Yeah. Barb, I want to invite you to sing our song. As a bit of a way of tying this time together, and then Lorraine's going to offer us some bread. Knowing that there's a lot of potential gifts, but there's also a lot of people who will be affected greatly, financially, isolation, mental health. I think a lot of domestic violence. There's all sorts of very icky potential as well. So we don't want to make it a luxurious going in, whilst of course there are gifts in that. So we'll also spend some time praying around this issue and for those front lines of the issue. But to just bring this moment, Barb, if you're up for a favorite song, that would be lovely.
Sure. Did you get the?
I did.
So this song was gifted from the Threshold Choir, the sort of head Threshold Choir, one of the original members wrote this song, and they actually wrote it specifically. Oh, sorry. They wrote it specifically for Australia, for when the fires were all going. So it's a beautiful gift from them to us, and I'm going to teach it to you. So I'll sing it to you first, show you where we're going, and then one line at a time, call and response style. Yep. So it goes like this. I haven't sung it all yet today, so I'll be croaky. May the air be washed with sunlight. We call this place into peace. The light and shadow of life rest here and breathe with the breath of the earth. So that's the whole thing. It's only 4 lines. I'm a real fan of these short, as you probably have noticed, little short songs with nice messages sung a lot, because I think it kind of helps change. Sorry, I keep wandering. So I'll sing a line, you sing it after me. May the air be washed with sunlight. May the air be washed with sunlight. Perfect. We call this place into peace. We call this place into peace. And we're going to put those 2 lines together. May the air, yep. May the air be washed with sunlight. We call this place into peace. Beautiful. And then the 3rd line goes, the light and shadow of life rest here. The light and shadow of life rest here. And breathe with the breath of the earth. And breathe with the breath of the earth. We're going to put the second 2 lines together, the light and shadow. Yep. The light and shadow of life rest here, and breathe with the breath of the earth. And now we're going to put the whole thing together. Yeah? Everybody okay? Yeah. And how about you in whatever land? What is it? FaceTime? Or what is it?
Facebook and then YouTube.
And YouTube.
Sure.
May, all together?
May the air be washed with sunlight. We call this place into peace. The light and shadow of life rest here, and breathe with the breath of the earth.
May the air be washed
with sunlight. We call this place into peace. The light and shadow of life rest here, and breathe with the breath of the earth.
May the
air be washed with sunlight. light and shadow of life rest here, and breathe with the breath of the earth.
A few more times.
May the air be washed with sunlight. We call this place into peace. The light and shadow of life rest here, and breathe with the breath of the earth. May the air be washed with sunlight. We call this place into peace. The light and shadow of life rest here, and breathe with the breath of the earth.
And that was written by Kate Munger from the Threshold Choir.
Let us all pray. This prayer, the prayer of the people, was written by Dr. Deirdre Palmer. God of love and compassion, we are called to love our neighbours and to be bearers of hope and grace in our world. Expand our hearts and vision to respond with compassion to those around us who are struggling in this time of uncertainty, anxiety, grief and suffering. Give wisdom and strength to our health workers and government officials as they provide leadership in bringing our country through this crisis. We bring before you and into our hearts and minds those whose work and income are uncertain, those who are isolated, those who are fearful of an unknown future, those who live in situations of domestic violence and whose isolation increases the control of their partners, those who are homeless, and all those who offer them support and care, those who are involved in aged care, our agency leaders, staff and residents and their loved ones, businesses whose futures are uncertain, their leaders and staff, school staff and students, those with health conditions that put them at a greater risk. Give wisdom and care-filled discernment to all our church leaders and our councils. As we seek to creatively live out our worship, witness and service in the ways that other Christ's life-giving love and presence. Strengthen and sustain us to be your people, shaped by grace, bearers of the Spirit's generosity and overflowing love. Through Christ, our light and hope, we pray. Amen.
Gail, I wonder if we might skip over our for the young part book reading, only because it's only my children who are here at the moment, and so maybe even to offer to read it to them.
I'll do that.
Awesome. In another
Can I
space?
just say
Yes.
that one of our ways of responding is being creative. So there's actually 8 kids here for the kids to take home to make their own wilderness. So it's all there.
Beautiful, Dad.
So
we are very lucky.
And there won't be only kids. I mean, any big kids wanted one.
Of which we have a few.
A couple of the lipsticks have been used before, but you know, we might as well use them.
Exactly. I'm really grateful to Gail and everything you offer to the kids in this place, so that's a wonderful thought. Thank you.
We're going, yeah, there's a few kids that I'll drop the things off, but they'll be spare.
a wonderful way to help them feel connected to the larger piece.
Is it the kind of thing too that could eventually come back and be put together?
Oh, yes, yes. In fact, I'm going to continue to work on our wilderness mural that they've helped do.
Yeah.
And I'll post that up.
Yeah.
It's progress.
Gail's making a length-long collage mural thing that kids have been contributing to, so we find ways to have that continue to evolve.
The challenge of wilderness.
Challenge of wilderness. Who would have thought? So we're going to hear our text, and I'm going to offer a brief reflection. We won't have a whole lot of time to discuss as we would normally, and particularly considering we're in John, so we have to allow about 15 minutes purely to read the text. So, Pamela, I'm going to ask you to come forward.
It's very brave.
It is very brave. John, our
10
most,
pages long.
It's about 10 pages long. It's our most waffly gospel, our most highfalutin gospel. But of course, I've got a soft spot for our friend John, who is a reflection of the evolving theology of Christian. Here you are.
I'm right in the way.
Pamela, do your thing, and we will journey with you. If we had more time, I'd love to enact this. It's a wonderful story, which you'd all be familiar with. Let's see where it takes us reading it at this time.
So John 9, 1 to 41. So we'll be here a while. Batten down the hatches. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." And when he said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva. Not good practice, obviously. And spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back to see. The neighbours and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he," and others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." And he kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then, how were your eyes opened?" And he answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And then I went and washed and received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees began to ask him how he had received his sight, and he said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, and then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. And so they said again to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." And he said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, who you say was born blind? How then does he see?" And his parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said again, "Ask him, he is of age." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." And he answered, I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. They said to him, What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I've told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples? Then they reviled him, saying, You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from. The man answered, Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. And if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And they answered him, You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us? And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, Do you believe in the Son of Man? And he answered, And who is he, sir? Tell me, so that I may believe in him. And Jesus said to him, You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him, and Jesus said, I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, Surely we are not blind, are we? And Jesus said to them, If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that I say that you say we see, your sin remains.
A monster.
It was.
A monster. It was beautifully read, because it is a wonderful story that we're well aware of. You'll of course be familiar with Monty Python and Talent for an Old Ex-Leper. This is the man who we're referring to today. It's interesting, the topic we were given for today was disruption. It was given to us long before the events arrived. Again, could there be a better word to name the current scenario than disruption? This morning we see our friends, the Pharisees, and I say friends because if we're honest as we read this text, we should probably see them as the most like us of this story, the religious who need to, hear what needs to be heard. These religious authorities believed that they were following God correctly. They were interpreting Torah precisely and were therefore righteous before God and in the in crowd. They had an understanding of how the world worked and were sure, as most would have been at the time, that if this man had been born blind, and someone or something must have happened to cause that to be the case. And of course they assumed that it was the parents who had sinned. They believed confidently that they had interpreted the life events and the way God works correctly. And then they have this encounter, this experience of disruption in the person of Jesus. Jesus touches a blind man, a no-no that would have made him unclean. He heals a blind man. He does so, we believe, on the Sabbath. He does so outside the temple structure. There's a whole bunch of no-nos. That's no-nos a go-go for mine. And to make matters worse, as they're getting their heads around this whole ideal, as they're trying to navigate the whole scenario of disruption, it's a blind man who schools them, who is attempting to tell them something that might be true. And they need to get their head around, where is this wisdom and truth coming from? Who are you to tell me? And of course, the big Pharisee walls go up for these guys. We don't have time to discuss this, but I'm really interested. When you enter a place of disruption, when you are confronted by new information or truth or ideas, what happens to you? What happens within you when you enter the wilderness of disruption? A couple of weeks ago, was driving home from Point Lonsdale on my wonderful Sunday off with my wonderful sister, and we were having a chat, and early in a 2-hour drive home, she challenged me. She threw out a question around the access I gained from my parents. And quite gently, she asked the question and made the suggestion that perhaps I was utilising their services, but actually not offering a whole lot in a non, service-orientated way. She was asking the question, well, do you call them and drop in and say hi and do dinner when you don't need their babysitting services? And it was this very challenging question and conversation. And it was fascinating how terribly I handled it. Fully on the back foot, I found myself in full Corona lockdown mode. So walls up, despite being in a car and in a conversation, I was self-isolating, attempting to avoid the potential spread and risk of truth. To finish this terribly awkward conversation, my sister, in the awkward silence, with still about an hour and a half to go in our trip, reached for the phone without asking and just called her twin sister, and they kind of chatted away for a while, which was probably the best case scenario amongst the awkwardness of a long highway. You see, when we are thrust into the wilderness of disruption, as we are right now, as things get turned on their heads, as we're about to have all sorts of challenges to the way we gather and relate and connect, to the way we do society, to the way we care and gather, as we are thrust into this wilderness, we are going to find all sorts of responses well up in us. This text is a wonderful reminder that in the wilderness of disruption, our very well-trained and practiced defences will be at the ready. The great toilet paper panic of February 2020 was a wonderful and yet terribly sad demonstration of that very fact. When we enter the wilderness of disruption, what happens within you and to you? See, very commonly our energy may go to shoring up the fortress, defending, protecting, projecting, or we may shrink away, overwhelmed. In the face of change, of new ideas, of difference, there are ways that you will have been trained to respond in order to protect yourself. In the face of any threat to security or even significance, we tend to stick to what we know. We tend to demonise or fear the new, and we tend to justify our own position. As I sat with this text, I noticed how much the Pharisees and how much I tend to see my feelings of threat as guardians of the truth, as actually resources that demonstrate, no, you're acting like this because you're in the right, rather than as an alarm that I may well be protecting a lie. Our responses tend to reveal more about what we fear than about what is true. So what was the blind man's response? It's pretty simple. I was blind, but now I see. See, these responses are two very different but always possible responses we can make in the face of disruption. In the second half of my car journey, after I was gifted a conversation my twin sisters were having, I was given a moment of pause that helped me reflect on what was happening for me. I didn't want to do it. I was fighting it all away. But I had this moment once the phone call ended, and I'm pretty lucky that the car didn't stop then and there, because I wouldn't have done it. But gifted the extra time to sit in the mire of my own responses. I then said, Loz, I'm really sorry I was that defensive. So of course, after even the conversation about her challenge, Then when the rest of the conversation we had, I was on full defence mode and was challenging her and trying to, and the whole conversation was muddied by my posture that I had. But after this phone call, I said, I'm really sorry I was that defensive, Liz. And then I said, I really hate the idea of a world in which you couldn't ask a question that was bubbling for you. That if you genuinely saw something or believed something, I hate the idea of a world that you couldn't bring that forward to me. I hate the idea that we'd all have to have thoughts and ideas about each other behind closed doors. So thank you for offering it. And as the conversation unfolded, I kind of came out from behind my walls of disruption and reconnected. I was caused to see things I wasn't up for seeing, to see the world a little bit differently, to see my actions and behaviours and responses and attitudes in a new light, as hard as that was to do. So even though it was more painful, I tried to welcome the invitation to see more clearly. And that was painful for me. The Pharisee energy in me wanted to say, she doesn't know what she's talking about, I'm fine, that couldn't be true, she's the one that needs to change. It took much more inner strength than I'm often able to muster to breathe deep and to notice the tension in my body, the heat in my skin, the spine, the hairs on my neck going up. It took me a little while to lean into the discomfort and actually choose a new path. We're in a place of disruption, a wilderness we've never entered before. And for this disruption to be transformative, for it to lead to greater love, we'll probably first need to be wounded by it. We have to face whatever the wilderness will bring up for us. So we're likely to have unhelpful responses aroused. We're likely to be uncomfortable. We're likely to be tempted to close and shut down or lash out or increase our anxiety and concern rather than to lean in, to breathe deep and to open up. We're going to be asked to attend to the Pharisee responses that arise in us and attempt to walk the way of, but once I was blind and now I see. That is, this is the reality we are faced with. This is where it's at. And I wonder what I can make of this. And I wonder what this will make of me. I'm going to read a poem that was supplied for this Sunday, months before Corona happened, by the resources we're using of Sanctified Art, and it was called The Wilderness is a Place of Disruption. My grandfather was a good man, but he believed that wilderness emotions were not to be seen. Cry with the door closed. Don't dwell on the negative. Chin up, kid. We've been here before. My grandfather was a good man. But I'd like to say the wilderness is here to interrupt your previously scheduled programming. Like water in the desert and setting the slaves free, the wilderness might be the very thing we need, the very thing we dream of, the very thing we plead for. I guess what I'm trying to say is it never seems appealing to let a bird in the house. But if you do, then you might as well open every window and door. And if you do, then you just might find yourself basking in the light, dancing in the breeze, overwhelmed with the beauty that an open door brings. So I'm opening my door and inviting in the wind to rustle up my heart and start over again. For sweeping the truth under the rug has never gotten us far. So may the wilderness be like a bird in your house. Throw open your doors. The truth must come out. Amen.
This is a song that we sang a few weeks ago. It's called Light of the World, and it's inspired by some of the words in the reading that we heard from the story.
Announcements before we go and before we have offering. The announcements are a little bit scarcer than there's no up-and-coming events as we enter the wilderness, and I've heard of churches who have said, you know what, we've been so busy for 6 months, we're actually going to shut down everything we do and just see what happens for us. And we've been forced into that space, and it will be interesting to then say, well, what do we choose to do on the other side of this? What do we put our hand to? What's important? And again, there'll be some gifts out of this. One announcement I do need to make, that is with great sadness, and word is no doubt getting around, that our friend Betty is no longer with us. She passed away at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning with Brian by her side. She had some peaceful final days. She was visited by many close friends at a pace that was very helpful for Brian and for the family. So farewells were done appropriately and adequately, but of course we now adjust to the world with a Betty-shaped hole in it. There will be a funeral service this Friday, but it will be one in which we won't be gathering there with them. So Brian will meet with immediate family and just a couple of friends, but pretty much just family. And it'll be a very small gathering here. And then at some time in the future, perhaps in another year, perhaps at an anniversary date that works with the family, there'll be a larger memorial service, and perhaps that might also accompany the scattering of ashes. So a way perhaps in a year's time for us to have a very free, full and celebratory Thanksgiving for her life and legacy that will be living itself on even at that point. So a different shape in the times we're in, but please be mindful of Brian, and I'm sure he'd welcome your calls and texts and emails, and particularly thoughts and prayers in the lead up to Friday. Yeah, so some sad news. Is there any other announcements? I dare say not.
I'd like to ask Lorraine to say a few words about giving.
Few words? I'm glad I asked that question. Lorraine. Yeah, do
that. As you are aware, I am your treasurer. And so it falls to me to make sure that we are in a financial situation to continue to have Matt as our minister, and we have 3 other employees. One of them is our cleaner, which we shall have to probably let go. So it's a bit unfortunate. We have Ingrid and Sue, who will continue at this stage. But what I need to bring to you is that we will have no offering for the foreseeable future. Some people do give direct giving, and I would encourage each and every one of you to consider this. You can do it in 2 ways. Our wages are paid from an account that we hold in the Uniting Church in Victoria, and any other bills are paid through our Bendigo Bank. I have a form here for a direct debit request that you can pass on to the Uniting Church. Have all the details here for it. Either that, or if you so desire, you can place your amount of money you want to give into the Bendigo Bank, which is our working account for paying our bills. All of our offering is now transferred every 3 months to our Uniting Church account. So I'm going to leave it at that and leave it with you. We'll have more discussion on Wednesday night regarding this, and anybody who would like to do direct debit or pay into our Bendigo account, you can send it afterwards. Thank you.
Perhaps I'll suggest that we'll communicate by email some of the details of how people may do direct debit.
Can I have a volunteer of someone else to take up the offering with me? We'll have someone take a plate around rather than pass it along, just in the interest of hygiene. We're going to take up our offering now and close our service with our final song.
I've decided to change the song, sorry Marilyn, to a song that many of us know, but I think is perhaps more appropriate. The song is Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found. From thine I see.
Tests and procedures and interviews and all that. So,
Definitely. What's Wendy?
Wendy.
Yeah. Wendy, definitely.
I have a wee suggestion. I don't know whether you've already done this bit. Have you done the bit where people do this?
Share. No,
share it. Yeah. It would be lovely to have some sort of, and not necessarily in here, but some sort of altar where people can individually go light a candle, say a little prayer or whatever for a friend or themselves or a neighbour or whatever. It'd be lovely. I'm going to have one in my house, or I've kind of started one already in my house. It's like a place to kind of, it's like a concentration of good energy, whatever that candles, just the easy way.
We're going to invite it to be creative in our care and compassion for others. I heard of priests who took photos of all his congregation and in empty mass stuck one on each of the chairs. And actually give this mass to his community and to find ways in which we do that. Give out photos of each other so that we can pray for each other at home. And we're going to be forced to be creative, and I dare say we'll come out the other side of different people, which is what the wilderness does. And ideas like that, we're going to gather this Wednesday and there'll be some worship conversation. Exactly. It can be outside at some sort of gathering wall or mural. Please bring forward those ideas. We'll definitely do some of that over Facebook. Please speak to council members, speak to myself. Get in touch if you've got ideas. We'd love to be reactive and responsive to the energy and the ideas that emerge. See, this is what this time uniquely will give us. It will uniquely grant us this. I'm going to allow you to be sent out. You need my permission to go, but I'm going to bless you as you do. May Christ be in your seeing the beauty and pain in the world. May Christ be in your hearing the laughter and the tears of the world. May Christ be in your thinking, and may you never be satisfied with easy answers. May Christ be in your speaking to share good news. May Christ be in your holding with strength and gentleness. May Christ be in your heart with patience and determination. May Christ be in your walking to take you far and wide. May Christ be deep in your soul, that you may always know deep peace and love. Bless you, my friends.
Let's stand and sing Shalom together.
Shalom to you now. Shalom, my friend. May God's full mercies bless you, my friend. In all your living and through your hiding,
Very good.